The term indie horror game on Steam is a very sore subject for a lot of people, and for good reason. Over at least the last decade, there's been a cavalcade of indie developers creating low-quality, asset-flipped and/or straight-up rip-off games, throwing their game on the platform for an extremely low price and relying on the fact that enough curious players will buy it because it's cheap, then buy it because it's bad, allowing them to turn a profit. Infamous examples that I would imagine most people have heard of would be Day One Gary's incident, made especially famous by Total Biscuit many, many years ago, and the utterly uncompromising animosity of Digital Homicide, whose escapades on Steam and YouTube, particularly with internet reviewer Jim Sterling, are by now the stuff of legend. I'm going to leave a link to a video by Frederick Knudsen in the description below if you haven't heard of this fascinating rabbit hole. The epicenter of many of these problems, and a point of contention for almost as long as it existed, was the Steam Greenlight program. In theory, Greenlight was a great idea. It gave underfunded, upcoming and struggling developers, teams or singular, the opportunity to put forward their idea to the Steam audience, who would then vote on whether they would like to see it released in full. If a game was given enough votes, it would then be selected by Steam for publishing assistance, allowing the developers the resources they needed to complete their idea and prepare it for sale. Given how poor Greenlight's reputation is now, there were a surprising number of success stories born from it, such as A Hat in Time, Papers, Please, Undertale, and a whole host of others. It's unfortunate that Greenlight was so easily exploitable, and that from its inception in 2012 to its cancellation in 2017, it became inextricably linked with shoddy horror games and, more specifically, the infamous indie horror with crafting and survival mechanics. Games like Rust, 7 Days to Die, and so on, a trend that continues to this day. The only criteria for putting your game on Steam's Greenlight platform was to pay a one-off fee, after which point you could wait it out, relying on herd mentality to laughingly vote for a terrible game because it was funny, and no one else will vote for it, it'll never get through. Which was a thought process that thousands of people had when it came to Digital Homicide's games. After Greenlight's demise in 2017, Early Access took over as the de facto "this game may or may not get released eventually, maybe no promises." Although Early Access has been around for a while and was running concurrently with Greenlight, it had the added benefit of providing an actual product to paying users in exchange for their feedback, in the mind to release a full product that would take on board all of the feedback the developers had received. Unlike sites like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Pledge Music and similar, you would receive something for your money immediately, guaranteeing a product in some form or another, even if there was no actual release date for a full version, or indeed even a guarantee of a full game at all. Early Access absolutely has many of its own problems, but with the advent of Steam's refund policy, it's become far more viable to try a game, decide it isn't for you, and return it for a full refund without having to worry about a game never being released. Indeed, there are uncountable numbers of games that have been in early access hell for an extremely long time, and it's often used as a poor defense when games are unfinished, unpolished, or broken. Oh well, it's still in early access, they have time to fix it. I'm giving you all this background info because I want to make it clear that the game that I'm talking about today is rooted in an extremely difficult background, which makes defending some of the actions of its developers tough. Before we get into that though, let's talk about the game itself. Albino Lullaby, also known as Umbasa wa Materu, or Grandmother is Waiting, was developed by Apelaw and released on Steam in September 2015. It was billed as being episode 1 of 3, with a season pass readily available. The single episode cost around £7 or $10 and for about 3 hours of content that's pretty standard. It is considered a horror game, and in particular I would brand it as a body horror game given what you uncover throughout the story. In Albino Lullaby, you play as an unnamed young boy who, following a car crash that apparently killed his parents, wakes in a large cage suspended in what appears to be an enormous underground system of caves, which are occupied by some very odd, very unique characters. Put simply, you must work your way through the bizarre mixture of houses, church-like rooms, caves and more to find a way back to the surface, and discover the oddities that lie in wait for you. The most striking thing about Albino Lullaby is easily its gorgeous aesthetic, a unique brand of childish cartoon-like drawings of people and homes, suddenly and vividly rendered from the imagination into reality. The further you progress, the stranger and more insane the world becomes, but for a horror game it's unusually bright and colourful. with a distinct palette that's rarely seen in horror these days. Of course, this absolutely factors into the unnerving atmosphere of the underground world. Everything is so unnaturally cheerful and inviting, as if desperately trying to, lull you into a false sense of security. Not only is the game visually appealing, but its sound design, music, and in particular its voice acting are all fantastic as well. As you wander around the caverns and homes of these strange worm-like creatures, you'll hear bizarre chants as the worms stare starry-eyed at an elevated preacher-like figure.
Looks like the skull touched that button. Looks like we're going to be clever. Clever cockroach. Oh,
You'll hear the hideous sounds of slimy bodies crawling along the floors, distant cries, bats, and more. It's all an exaggerated version of reality. Day-to-day life dialed up to the extreme, and as the worms themselves start to appear, it only increases the feelings of disgust and unrest already created by the strange caricature of life that you've been thrown into. On top of this, the things these worm people say are genuinely unsettling, and when they notice you, they say the oddest, most hilarious things.
It's nice to be today. I want to know it and touch it and lick it.
Funny, but definitely a little creepy. Realistically, the game could be considered a walking simulator, as there really isn't a heck of a lot to do. You find notes that explain more about the society you're in, and you can use these in conjunction with the environmental details to work out what on earth is going on and what the worms truly do to the children they kidnap. Partway through the game, you acquire the blue flame, which can be used to temporarily ignite certain lamps and cause the worm enemies to back away, which gives you time to flee. There are certain aspects of the game that involve puzzle-style chase sequences, for example, looping around an area in such a way that you trap a rabid enemy in a gated arena of sorts. But for the most part, you'll be running around exploring and enjoying the game's completely bonkers world. I don't particularly want to discuss the plot or really the contents of the game itself too much, because honestly I think it's worth playing and discovering for yourself. Although the circumstances surrounding the game are, especially now, pretty dire, Albino Lullaby itself is a great standalone experience that can be enjoyed for what it is, despite its cliffhanger ending. In all honesty, I think the game's ending can be considered fairly final, as it ties everything together quite nicely. So, if you recall earlier, I mentioned that Albino Lullaby was billed as episode 1 of 3 and that a season pass was available at the time of release. Since September 2015, information regarding the elusive final 2 episodes of the game has been incredibly sparse, with the developers maintaining a reasonable-ish amount of transparency for a while after release before slowly descending into silence. The last significant update on the progress of episodes 2 and 3 occurred in January of this year, and it may well be the last we ever hear of the Albino Lullaby universe. And that season pass is still on sale along with individual prices available for episode 2 and 3. Both of these episodes have release dates, both of them significantly delayed, with episode 2 originally slated for release in March 2018 and 3 due for release in September 2018. Neither of them have had updates, demos, or the like since. In December 2019, Justin Pappas, the lead developer for the game, pinned an update on the Steam page discussing the fate of Albino Lullaby's sequels. In essence, it came down to one simple fact. Unless Ape-Lore could find an interested publisher, the remaining 2 episodes would be cancelled. A demo of what would have been episode 2 would be released regardless, but without a publisher there was no hope for the game moving forward. Information around the handling of the game and its creation is sparse, but there are a few details worth pointing out. One particularly scathing review is less about the quality of the game and more about the way it's been handled since it was first announced. I'm one of the most critical here on the Steam forums of Justin Pappas. That's because I know the full history of how the many postponed promised release dates went down. You newcomers don't even know, since your wait has just begun and will continue for years, I assure you. In case you were unaware, back in 2015 there were date-specific release dates for each episode. Now we know that those eps were not even started on, nor did he have the budget to even begin to think starting about them. We would not have bought the season pass had we known Justin had no intention of releasing the EPs by the date advertised. I'll be honest, the only reason I even came across this game was thanks to a video by a creator then known as Jordan Underneath, and although the original video is sadly unavailable now, it can still be found on YouTube, and it is an excellent breakdown of the game's value and its themes. I'll link a mirror in the description below. So, to hear about all of this after checking in on the game on and off for the past few years was deeply disappointing. It was a success on Kickstarter, receiving over $25,000, yet the last official update on there was in 2015, and the last comment from a backer was over 2 years ago saying the following. Is there any update on episode 2? Can you please at least send everyone an update saying that you are still working on it, or that all of you are at least alive and well? This comment received no response, and from what I can tell, as someone who did not back the game and so may have limited visibility, there's been no response to anyone from April in the last 5 years. There are numerous comments throughout 2016 on the Steam discussions board that express irritation and regret over the lack of news and communications for episode 2, and inevitably this bled into the wait for both 2 and 3. As the timeline for the game's episodic releases came and went, comments turned from excitement and interest to anger at having been deceived. Many people who purchased the Season Pass have received nothing further for their trouble. This user posted the following on the 3rd of May 2016. Yeah, I regret buying it already. I knew it would take some time to have episode 2 out, but it's been like 8 months or so and we don't know an exact date, and IMO, the game was fun and interesting, but it's taking so long, even for updates. After this, on the 16th of May 2016, Justin posted the following. You're right, it does look like we're trying to get people to pre-purchase the game with no intention of delivering, but the truth couldn't be farther from that. We all want episode 2 to be as awesome as possible and not a rushed half-assed money grab, right? We are dropping the ball in the PR arena. We are learning that PR alone is a full-time job. Sorry about that. We are currently seeking funding for the completion of episode 2. In the meantime, we are working on polishing EP1 for VR because we at least have the minimal funds needed for that. Currently episode 2 is slated for release in September 2017. I'm sure that comes as a disappointment. If we are unable to raise the funding we need to make the game happen, we will of course be issuing refunds on pre-purchases. A short while later, as the conversation increased in heat and people began to scrutinise Justin's online activity, the following back and forth was had. Justin's status announcement on his profile. Currently working on an unannounced project at Torn Banner Studios. Doesn't sound very promising at all, so I will not purchase episode 2 as it looks like that it will never be released. Sad news, it was so promising and I loved episode 1. Good luck. To which Justin replied, Ah, what status is that? That's like 4 years old. To which another individual replied, That just goes to show you have issues with updating statuses across the board, and that extends to your personal Steam accounts. Look at the date of the posts you're replying to, they are over a month old. Nothing has changed since. As far as I can see, nobody has been refunded over 3 years later. Despite various claims around needing more funding to finish episode 2, whilst at the same time discussing the hiring of several new employees, there has been little to no movement since. And whilst there have been pinned posts and discussions around still needing more funding, needing a publisher, being certain of release dates and returning to uncertainty shortly after, the extraordinary potential of this hidden gem remains untapped, if not completely wasted. At this point, I don't know what to believe. My own experiences with crowdfunding and early access games have rarely lent themselves well to sympathising with those who run them, and whilst it's true that there are a growing number of success stories arising from both of those types of campaigns, it's also undeniably true that there is a long, well-trodden road paved with failures, scams, and false promises. The goodwill of people is easy to exploit, and the sunk cost fallacy that often goes hand in hand with these kind of situations means that many will continue to support those with irrefutable evidence against them regardless of the circumstances. And it really is a shame. Albino Lullaby is an excellent little game, and part of me desperately wants to highly recommend it. I want this game to succeed, and I want to see the next episodes be released, but I am also extremely hesitant to even suggest that more money be thrown at a developer who is so dismal at providing solid updates. whose discussions around the game are so inconsistent, who has admitted for years that a PR person is needed, who said in December last year that they needed a publisher or they were bust before ignoring all inquiries to the matter 9 months later. A developer who recommends reaching out via email or following their website or following their Twitter and Facebook, whilst blithely ignoring the fact that none of these social sites are updated on an even remotely regular basis. Hell, the website still says that episode 2 and 3 are due in 2017 and 2018 respectively. Whether or not the rest of Albino Lullaby's episodes are ever released, the ragged path taken to get there should never be forgotten. Unlike the blithe unawareness and awkwardness of someone like Sean Murray, the way that Justin Pappas interacts with his audience feels so much more willfully disingenuous. I want to be wrong, and I sincerely hope that this game's universe has a chance to shine in the way it deserves one day. But in the end, what it comes down to is this. Albino Lullaby is a fascinating look at what could be, whilst also being a stern reminder of what is.